Hello viewers from the future, my name is Boden Saroid, and in today's video we will be explaining a very debated topic, which is why Mozart does not write 8-bar music. So if you came here to learn how to write symmetrical 8-measure music, this video is not for you. What we will be covering here is all of the different techniques that Mozart has for creating music that is asymmetrical and it breaks the mold. So basically we will go over 10 different techniques which are in this PDF. If you want to have the PDF, you can find it on my Patreon page, and here we have the definitions of them. So rather than me going over all of these theoretically with explanation, we'll just start with examples. The first one is extension, and here we have a very beautiful Mozart sonata. I'll play it. Right, that is the theme. Clearly, we do not have 8 bars. So what have we got? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 until here. How are these 10 bars structured? Well, the first thing we need to understand is either if we have a sentence or a period. What is the main difference between them? In the sentence, the basic idea is repeated twice before we move to the contrasting idea. So we've got a presentation and a continuation. However, in the period, the first thing we have is a basic idea followed by a contrasting idea, and that creates an antecedent, and then this basic idea repeats after the contrasting idea, and we have finally the cadential part. So in this case, what we need to look at is the first 2 bars. I'll give them a color. Can select, for instance, red. I'll put it transparent, maybe a little bit more transparent. This, and that would be our basic idea. So as we look forward, what we see is that there is this continuation that is basically developing this basic idea. What we have is a very common way of working with the basic idea. First, the tonic moves to the dominant, and then the dominant resolves to tonic, right? And in doing so, Mozart travels across this second degree, right? There are different ways into looking into this, but in this case specifically, the chords are very clearly written in root position. So we could be seeing this as one way of a cadence, right? In Caplin's terminology, which is the book we will be referencing here, so this information is extracted from Caplin's Analyzing Classical Form book, what we will find is that this is not a perfect authentic cadence. Caplin would define this as an imperfect cadence because the top note of the melody is here the third. So a perfect authentic cadence would sound like this, right? However, we have the raising third, right? This creates a very inconclusive feeling, which really contrasts with the final perfect authentic cadence, which appears at the end. We can see it here. It starts there with this inverted chord that goes into the first degree. Then we have this second degree and the final cadence 6/4. It goes 5/3 and 1. That is a perfect authentic cadence that really begins here. And it's the one that defines and finishes the musical structure we're analyzing, right? So just because we saw here 1, 2, 5, 1, not necessarily we see this as a cadence that is perfect, but in this case we have this imperfect cadence, which creates an inconclusive feeling. What follows is the contrasting idea. So just because of the colors we've been using, you can already predict that it's a sentence, because a sentence has a presentation and a continuation. And we have here our basic idea, and then the repetition of the basic idea. What is happening in this continuation? Well, normally we would have, if we have 4 bars of presentation, we get 4 bars of continuation. This is not the case. In this case, what happens is that that is not the ending. So the end logically would happen here. And that would be a perfect authentic cadence. But that's not what's happening. We have an extension. So all of the music that I will put now with a green color, which is this, is the extension. And it's the first technique that we're learning. So it's the process of adding extra units. This is the extra unit or segments that lengthen the structure. So originally, we would expect the piece to end here, but it's not an ending, right? What is happening here? Well, Caplin would define most likely this as tonic prolongation, because we have here the perfect first degree, which is the root. And it's staying there with all of these auxiliary harmonies. What are the auxiliary harmonies? We've got, for one, is the second degree, then we have the first, and that's repeated like several times. And we even get this sort of 7th degree that leads into the tonic, right? And that is repeated a second time here. So this is just the same. After achieving this process, which is not the cadence, we have the extension, which eventually provides the cadence. Now, one could ask, why Mozart did this? Couldn't he just written 8 bars? Why did he need an extension? Well, the first thing is that we need to understand this is not a beginner's sonata. Mozart already wrote multiple sonatas at this stage. And in this sonata specifically, Mozart wants to explore something that's very common, and we'll see a lot in piano concertos, is the extension of the cadential process. So in the final part of the sonata, in this final part of a sentence or a period, we are getting a prolongation or an extension of that ending that lengthens the piece. And in this case, it's through the addition of these extra units. Extension is not the same as expansion. We will see now the two terms. They sound very similar, but they are not. So expansion would be an example of this. What is the main difference between extension and expansion? In extension, we are adding elements. So I'm having 8 bars, and in an extension to these 8 bars is 2 bars of extension. However, an expansion starts from the starting point having something larger. So we're enlarging a single unit by elaborating on it. Here's the example. Normally, a basic idea in a musical context is 2 bars. Here, we're having 3. Which is that, right? So I'll highlight my basic idea. The basic idea is, well, we're using red. So here is red. You can see what follows is this. What was that? Well, that was the contrasting idea. And in this case, it's also enlarged. After that, what do we get? Again, the basic idea. So how many bars have we got in total? Well, we'll now count, but it's clearly more than 8. We've got 3 instead of 2. So that is creating our basic idea. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 instead of instead of 4. Oh, sorry, instead of 2 again. And then we've got 3 instead of 2. And this probably symmetrical, we've got also 8. So let's add up. We've got 8 plus 3, it's 11. And 11 times 2 is 22 bars. That's his period. It's a really large period. It's a compound period. You could be looking into this first symphony by Mozart also as a contraction of 4 and then an expansion of these 4 into 8, and see it as a compound period of 2 sentences. But I really like to see this as a good example of an extension, because we can see the whole structure, these 22 bars, as one single period. And what is happening in this case? We've got, instead of 2 bars, 3. It's a tonic prolongation. And then this cadence is in half time. It could have been faster. Which would be the normal speed at which it would unfold in relation to the first idea. So that is how an expansion looks like. It's where you are enlarging one segment instead of 2, you're getting 3. Whereas an extension is when you're adding these extra units, right? So you could be viewing in a way the expansion as the process of enlarging within the element. So we cannot specifically point down which part is being enlarged. Is the whole structure just played half time? And because of that, it sounds longer than it should. We cannot say like, oh, it should have ended there and then he added these 4 bars. That would be a very bold statement. So that's why we make this distinction between expansion and extension. Let's keep going. So, third technique out of 10. The third one is interpolation. So interpolation, the definition we've got here, is insertion of a related material between 2 logically connected formal units without altering their relationship. So this sounds really fancy at first, I need to acknowledge that, but we will look at it through this example. So in this case, this comes from a piano concerto by Mozart, and this is how it sounds. So what is happening here? We've got 10 bars, again 10. And clearly in this case, well, if we look into the materials, we can identify a basic idea. I will remove the green outline. We've got the basic idea, and it's repeated here, which makes it a period. And we've got the contrasting idea, which is the blue. This is our contrasting idea. And between these two, there is this little green cell, I'll put it green, which is this raising scale. That is the interpolation, right? So that's the unrelated material. Well, and it's not fully unrelated, it's a chromatic scale that we can also trace maybe there, it's connected. But this material structurally is breaking the mold, because originally if we just remove it, we would get this music. Right? It would make perfect sense. We would have this symmetrical 4-bar structure. By adding this 1 bar, which is what Mozart does here, we get 5. And since we had originally 8, you're adding 1, you're adding another 1, you get 10. That's how we create, instead of 8 bars, 10, through an interpolation. It's an addition of an additional element. And then harmonically, it's quite straightforward. It starts with a tonic, then goes to the dominant, and then the tonic resolves to tonic. There are some chromatic motions that are really interesting to explore. Like, I encourage students really to analyze how here secondary dominance appears. So you can see this as the dominant, dominant of the dominant, dominant again, tonic, dominant, dominant of the fourth, tonic, and then we have this dominant of the dominant going here. The dominant. So it's really chromatic, and Mozart makes sure that every single beat gets a different note. But the technique we're looking here, it's not so much harmony as structure, so we will focus on the technique. It's interpolation, and it's a very useful technique that it's not seen that often. So I encourage all composers to explore this concept of having your normal structure and adding this little element that just makes it asymmetrical or breaks a little bit the reference. Next, compression is the opposite of expansion, right? So compression is when we reduce the large scale into something small. We're shortening it. And this is a marvelous example. In this case, we're getting the melody here. Right? It's 6 bars, no, 7. That's what it lasts. That's the theme, right? How is this theme built? Well, let's examine. We've got our basic idea, starts here, 2 measures, nothing strange. It repeats afterwards. That makes it a period, right? We have a period. But in between, we've got the blue one, which is the contrasting idea. What's happening with the contrasting idea? It starts here and it overlaps. Right? So instead of adding 1 bar here to finish the contrasting idea and starting it on the next bar, bar 5, Mozart makes the beginning of the next idea coincide with the ending of the other. And that's where we're getting this reduction, right? So I will play it without the compression. It would sound like this probably. There we would get something symmetrical because we would have the pause, the ending of the first part of the period, the antecedent, and then we get the consequent. But in this case, they overlap. And this is a really great example of how you make, in this case, period of 7 bars due to compression between contrasting idea, well, between antecedent and consequent. Right. Compression is there clarified clearly. Let's keep looking at the cadential deviations, and I believe there are a few of them. Let's go to the beginning page. Page 1, we've got all of them. So there are 3 types of cadential deviations. Deviations imply that the normal way that a cadence unfolds, which is perfect authentic cadence to create an ending, is changed or it moved somewhere else. So we've got interrupted cadence, which many people know is the 5/6 usually. Evaded cadence, which is the technique of 1 more time, and then we have abandoned cadence, where the actual cadence is weakened. So instead of having the root position, we get some inversion or omission or something like that. So let's look at the 3 examples we've got for these. First one is interrupted cadence. So let's see if we can see it. This phrase really looks long, so let me play it. Right, that's where it ends. It's 20 bars. We've got 20 bars. Now, in this case, it's 20 because the actual nominal number of bars doesn't represent the real numbers. So this is something that Caplin really explains well in his book, saying that when the tempo of something is really fast, the actual bars can be doubled or halved. So what we're having in this case is, because the tempo is so fast, we're not seeing the basic idea as a unit of 2, but the basic idea becomes a unit of 4. So in this case, we are getting 16 being the equivalent of 8. That would be the normal. But we're getting an addition, so we're getting something added, because if not, we wouldn't have 20. So let's examine this through this lens and see the basic idea at this double speed. So the red would be the basic idea. I'm highlighting it now. It's all of these, oh, that's blue. It's all of these 4 bars. Right? And they are repeated really afterwards here, exactly the same. So what is the contrasting idea? It's this. These 4 bars repeated there. And the interrupted cadence that we're talking about is really happening here. So if you look at the harmony, it's 2, we're in A minor, 5, and 6, right? Which really quickly transforms into some sort of 4 because we have the D. But is this, right? How would that sound with a perfect authentic cadence? That would be the perfect conclusive cadence. But we get this instead. So that allows us to have an extension. And in this case, it's an added element. We can view it as an extension. It's these 4 bars that are played afterwards, but they are created because the cadence was interrupted. So it's the cadential deviation that is produced here. This technique adds an extension that after this interrupted cadence brings us home with a perfect authentic cadence in A minor, right? Harmonically, at the very beginning, we start with very common techniques. Mozart does a tonic prolongation. And after this tonic prolongation, we have a half cadence. Then the tonic prolongation is repeated, tonic prolong, and we get an interrupted cadence. So I'll be playing this and labeling again what we're seeing. I'll just put quickly the labels here. It's a period with a cadential deviation. So we start with the basic idea. Right? That basic idea starts with a tonic prolongation and ends on the dominant. Then we have the contrasting idea. Ends on a half cadence. Basic idea repeated. That would be the consequent. We've had the antecedent, now is the consequent. And the consequent continues with the cadential deviation. That's where it ends, right? I'll just add here quickly the labels. That's basic idea. That would be antecedent. That would be the consequent. And here we have the basic contrasting idea. BI is basic idea and contrasting idea with that extension of the cadential deviation. Great. This example is very clear, straightforward. Let's look into another one. This one is more sophisticated because Mozart here applies another technique, and this example actually appears in Caplin's book. So it's an example where we're getting 13 bars instead of 8. I'll first just play it. So how do we get 13 out of 8? So 5 bars were added almost out of nowhere. Well, the first thing we need to look into is how the beginning, which is our presentation, this is a sentence, right? So we have a sentence is a presentation, and then we have the continuation. So in the sentence presentation, we're getting 6 bars instead of the usual number, which is 4. So what is happening here? Well, Mozart is extending or having an expansion of one of these cells. So there are several techniques here. This is 4 bars instead of 2. So it's an expansion. How would that look like? Expansion. So I'll play it without the expansion. I'll just summarize it. So we have I could just do there, just that part. And then this would have been condensed. What we have afterwards is this continuation, and the continuation is lasting 7 bars. Why? Because we're having, instead of the usual number, which is 4, we're having 2 times the cadence, right? And this is what is known as the one more time technique. So I'll play it without the one more time. Without the one more time, what I need to do is I would need to play this and skip directly to the last beat. That's how it would sound. That would be perfect 4 bars. I will actually now play the entire thing with a normal 8-bar structure. So without the extension, or sorry, the expansion of the 4 bars in the presentation, and without the one more time technique. Perfect 8 bars, symmetrical, classical. But that's not what's happening here. So if you would like some color to see the elements I was removing, this thing that I put in green is what I was removing to get 8 bars. And it's this expansion because the unit is like extended, and then we're getting the cadence 2 times. So this is what is called evaded cadence. Why is it evaded? Because if we look carefully, we've got 4, well, actually it starts earlier. We've got 1 with the inversion. We've got 4, and then we have 5, and it should go where? To 1. But it doesn't. What we have is that 5 is being held, and it's repeated again. And finally we get to the cadence. Right? If we want to see what's happening at the very beginning, I don't see there's much complexity. It's all a tonic prolongation. How do we know if it's a tonic prolongation or not? We just should look at the bass in this case. The bass is staying on F as a pedal point, and it's just repeating. Right? So that's a good example of a cadential deviation number 2, evaded cadence. And the final one is called abandoned cadence. So abandoned cadence is where the cadence is weakened. So instead of getting the normal usual cadence, we get some sort of softer version, right? So let's see, or it can be omitted entirely or disrupted. So let's play the example we've got here. Right, it continues. So it's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Right, when you look at this, you might be thinking like, it's 16, it's very irregular. But it's more complex than that. So let's examine this sentence. We've got the basic idea at the very beginning. I think that is very straightforward, is this basic idea with a tonic prolongation. Again, how do I see the tonic prolongation? Because the bass, G, is just having, in this case, a double neighbor tone, right? It's a very beautiful motion because that motion we have in the bass is the opposite of what we have above. So we have F sharp and A above, where here is happening A and F sharp, right? I'd really like to highlight this, so I'll probably for this use some sort of lines to show you that relationship. But well, going back to what we were explaining here, this is a presentation of a sentence, so I'm going to write it. We're in G major, presentation of sentence. What follows is the continuation. So the presentation is very symmetrical. It's 4 bars, it's 1, 5, 5, 1. Perfect. Now we should be getting 4 bars, but do we get them? Let's see. I'm gonna be counting. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So what happened? Well, I will play just 4 and we will see what's happening at the 4th bar. That's what happened. So it's leaning on this D, 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 D. That is not a cadence. I mean, some people will say, but he's doing 5 inverted and it goes then to tonic. How can it not be a cadence? Well, let's review what the definition of cadence is. So if we are seeing the cadence as anything that has a 5 and goes somewhere to tonic in this case, and it's a cadence, then we have a really broad definition of cadence. Traditionally in classical music, and this goes again to the theory that Caplin explains in his book, this all comes from chapter 5, is that a perfect authentic cadence, and he explains it really at the very beginning of the book in chapter 1, you have the root position of the dominant going to the tonic. So if there is no root position dominant, we don't have any cadence. And in this case, since it's inverted, we cannot talk even about a cadence. How would you explain it in this passage? It's a tonic prolongation or an abandoned cadence that could have resolved maybe with this process to a tonic, but Mozart does not want to do that, because if he were to do it, we would get a symmetrical phrase. And as you can see, Mozart was really aware of creating music that was asymmetrical. And that asymmetry is really what makes Mozart's music so unique and so catchy. So many people focus on the very obvious stuff, which is 8 bars, 4 bars, but there are these precious jewels where the music is asymmetrical. We're getting 8, instead of 8 bars, we get 10. And then what Mozart does is he repeats again those 6 bars. So we have 2 techniques here. That would be the abandoned cadence. And then we have the one more time technique. So the one more time, it's another extension because we're just adding an element. I'll probably use a different color. Let's use purple. It's the repetition of all of that. So how would this music sound if it were 8 bars? I'll play it. And that would be 8. However, we don't have that. We have this. And then one more time. And then the cadence arrives. All right, so that would be the third type. Let's keep moving forward. I think we just have 3 more functions left, so I don't want to really keep this video too long. At the end of the video, there are some examples, and these are in the PDF that I call bonus examples that you can use to kind of use them as case studies, right? This is a wonderful example from Mozart's C major sonata, again from a rondo, minuet. This comes from his very famous G minor symphony. Right? So really wonderful music. And it's so fascinating to see that many of these extremely famous themes are far away from being simple 8 bars. They're very sophisticated. Some are even some of his most famous and popular themes. right? This is not 8 bars. If you keep looking, I think it lasts over 20, so it's like very, very long. Good. So let's look at the final 3 functions we've got here. Framing function 1. It's very simple. What does it say? Introduction. We all know what an introduction is. A short opening that sets up the material. So here it's that cell. Mozart could have just decided, I will start here. But he adds this before. Right, so that's the introduction. Now, let's analyze this sentence, because it's a sentence. We have the basic idea, sentence, presentation, and it's clearly not a sentence that's lasting 8 bars. So what is happening here? Let's examine. We've got the red, that's the basic idea. It's repeated here. Actually, it's repeated exactly the same way. And after this presentation of the basic idea, we're getting the contrasting idea. So the contrasting idea is interestingly far longer than 4 bars. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bars. So how do we get 9 bars out of 4? What's happening is that this section, which is just the cadence, it's really expanded. So we would expect a normal cadence just to be like this. But each of the functions that we're having are really enlarged. So this second degree lasts 4 bars. And then the dominant that is happening here is really expanded. And we're getting finally the perfect authentic cadence. So it's really important to view the different processes that are happening. We're having one expansion within these 4 bars. Mozart would have just done 2 bars instead of 4. And then the final cadence, it's 2 bars instead of 5, right? So how would that sound if we were to do it in a more regular way? That would be regular 4 bars. However, it would lose all of the magic that is happening with the addition of all of this part that is just elaborating on this circle of fifths. Just in case you're not seeing the circle of fifths, I can highlight it. So we're having G going to C, then F sharp going to B, then E going to A, then D going to G. And I know some might be thinking, but you're like cherry picking these. Well, I'm looking at the roots of the chords. So this is a G major chord, that's this 1, right? Then C is the 4th degree, F sharp is the 7th, right? So we're just like looking at the roots of each case as the 3rd. Actually, the 7th is diminished, so I'll put the little circle there. Then this is the 6th, that's the 2nd, right? The 6th moved. And we have then the 5 and the 1, right? So in reality, all of this is a sequential passage. Caplin describes there are 3 types of things. You get usually prolongations, which we saw a lot, cadences, which have the dominant always in root position, and then we have the final part, which is sequential harmony. This is a great example of a cycle or sequence of fifths, right? So it's a cycle of fifths followed by a perfect authentic cadence. How could we enlarge this more? Mozart could have done this 3 bars. right? And that type of expansion is really common in piano concertos. So we see often these types of cadences that are very long, and the phrases last usually 20, 30, many more bars than the average 8 or 16. Right, let's keep looking. We've got two more functions. So framing function 2. This one is called closing section. What it means is that the normal ending is repeated over and over again in order to get more bars than we should. Really, the phrase that we should be looking at begins here, right? Because the beginning is applying other principles. We will also analyze it. But let's start here, which is this sort of marching rhythm. Right? So I guess it's a very great example because it's very straightforward. We have a period. We'll first highlight the basic idea. It's ornamented the second time. And then we have the contrasting idea, which is this. And if you look closely, you will realize that the ending is having 2 times the perfect authentic cadence. So we're having the 5-1, I'll put it in caps, 5-1 repeated here. So that is the framing. Why is it called framing? Because if you think about it, it's like if you have a painting, the frame is what is outside of it. So that's why we can have some framing at the beginning, like the introduction. That's what we were trying to see here, the introduction. Or we could have some framing at the end, the closing section. So if you get an introduction, the theme, and the end, the sort of coda, what you get is a frame that's holding the theme at the beginning and at the end. And the middle is where you're getting the theme. So this is a clear symmetrical period, but the period is extended with a framing function, right? We can clearly see that as an extension. It's an added element that is added after the cadence. And Mozart could have added many more of these. But probably if you would add too many of them, it would end. It's important to realize if we add it here, it would be considered more an interpolation rather than a framing function, because the framing has to be really towards the end. Great, so now that we understand this period, it's really important to highlight what's happening at the beginning, because this is not 8 bars either. It's 9, 10, 11, 12. What is happening? So how did we get 12? Well, the first thing is very clear to see that the sentence starts with the basic idea and is there. So it's the development of the basic idea, the repeat developed, and it becomes the presentation of a sentence. However, the second part, which is the continuation of the sentence, is not 4 bars. It's 1, 2. So there we already have a good example of an imitation that has been added, this imitation of that motif, that creates extra bars. Originally, we would just need 2, which would be these 2 bars. And then the cadence, which is happening here, is abandoned. Right? We don't have a cadence. It happens later. And that's your cadence. So it's a combination of different techniques, but in reality, if we were to focus on condensing it, I could actually turn it into 8. Let's listen. right? Since our ears are really used to the larger form, it might sound like, oh, this ends really quickly. But it's the greatness of these composers that they knew, and specifically in this case Mozart, how to make an asymmetrical, larger structure. Right, we've got the final one. The final one that's presented here is called standing on the dominant. So what does that mean? It means that the dominant function, which is usually the one of tension, is being extended. And I think these are perfect examples because they're seen a lot in cadences, where you're just having this transitional element towards the end of it, and then the dominant is just expanded. So I will just play it so you get to hear it. Right, and it continues. So very common in piano concertos, in cadences, and oftentimes we see it also at the end of a transition. So it's this process of just enlarging the dominant. You can have it in this beautiful example where tempos are changed, the structure stops, the bar numbers disappear because everything is just floating, and we have the dominant just ornamented with the passing tones, chromatic notes, double neighbor tones in a trill. Chromatic scale, and it's then this motif that's just repeated sequentially and lands on the dominant, right? So it's a very beautiful example of us standing on the dominant. It's creating just suspense instead of resolution, and very important technique. Great, so we've got here the case studies. Again, I'm saying that you can clearly find them on, on Patreon. If you want, what we can do is just analyze one of them so you see a little bit the different techniques, and I'll be leaving some time for you to think. But this is a very wonderful example of something, a period or a sentence, you'll tell me now, that lasts 21 measures. And that's where it ends. All right, so what is happening here? Well, first, we have a very straightforward, bold statement of a basic idea. It's this tonic arpeggio. I really love it because it's monophonic. So this is our basic idea. What we need to look at is if the basic idea is repeated right after or if it's repeated later. In this case, we don't see it repeated right after. It's clearly repeated later, right? So that's where the basic idea repeats. Now, you could be seeing this and saying like, all right, we have basic idea of 2, and then what? It's 6 bars? Well, that's indeed. And actually it overlaps. So what you're having is the overlap there. So there are several different techniques. On the one hand, we have a contraction because the ending of one is overlapping with the beginning of the next. But at the same time, the contrasting idea is being extended. And what are the elements that are making it longer? Well, first, the fact that Mozart is just repeating here, so he could have not repeated this. And then the cadence, look at this cadence. It's really similar to that extension we were seeing in the C major sonata. Right? We have the second degree extended. And then it goes into the tonic. Second degree, 5 and 1. That is how Mozart, in his advanced sonatas, manages to combine techniques. You're starting with a basic idea of 2, and instead of following with a contrasting of 2, he manages to do 6 that overlap and become actually 5, right? And then the next one, it's an extremely long cadential idea because it should have ended in 4 bars. And actually it does. You have something there. But the real ending is in bar 21. So what is happening here? Well, we have a repetition of this. So it's what we would call an extension, right? And let's first examine why that extension is necessary. So this is extended. We have the extension. The extension is necessary because this is not a perfect standard cadence. It's basically an inverted diminished chord that has a secondary dominant, so it's the secondary dominant inverted of the second degree. So it's not fully a modulation. We don't end in D minor. If Mozart wanted to have this in D minor, it would sound like this. And you would have that cadence. But he doesn't do that. He does this. And then the diminished chord leads us to F major in order to add yet another element, which is this purple one. It's another extension that lasts, in this case, 6 bars. And it's 6 because this 5 goes into a 6, so that's an interrupted cadence. And at the same time, we're having the one more time cadential process. So we have this repeated one more time. And I'll just put it with yet another color so you can see that technique. So it's this repetition. First time is this. And then we repeat it one more time. And now it's resolving. And that is how Mozart turns a normal period of 8 bars into 21, right? It's a wonderful example. So I encourage you all to keep studying these phrase deviations. I find them fascinating. And for me, it's really important as a composer to realize that 8, 4, or 2 are by far the simplest structural options you can take. Great composers, like in this case Mozart, were masters of phrase deviations. And if you want to read more about it, well, you have here this PDF which has the examples, but more importantly, go to Caplin's book. So, Analyzing Classical Form. There, you will find in chapter 5 all of this information explained in 50, 60 pages with examples, vivid examples of string quartets, concertos, and they're all detailed. So you have all of the analysis there. That's all for now. So please, if you like this work, if you want me to keep uploading videos, because it's been a while since I uploaded last video, I really would appreciate that you support my work on Patreon. And in addition, feel free to write to me an email if you have questions about this, or leave a comment with suggestions, or even a really nice assignment I want to give you all. So if you're staying right now till the end of the video, I really would want you to find examples of phrase deviations in other composers. So please write in your comments, like, I found an example of an interpolation, or this is an example of a compression. Say the name of the piece, If it's a classical symphony or something, please tell me the number of the movement or the position where it appears, and provide this so we have a discussion about why we can have music that is not 8 bars. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm wishing you all a great week. Take care. Bye bye.